my mother disappeared. My father disappeared. I was in care in somebody's home. Well, I didn't know it was foster care. I just was in this stranger's house, like I'd been kidnapped. Nobody kind of explained it, or if they did, I was too young to understand it.
Hi everybody, welcome back to the Great and New podcast from the Great Schools Trust. I hope you've been enjoying the sessions so far. I think we've done probably about 14 podcasts so far, so I'm really enjoying them, meeting with some fantastic speakers, and today's no different. We've got a brilliant speaker on today called Gary Millar, who's from Edinburgh. He's been the Lord Mayor of Liverpool. He's on fantastic jobs with government, in Whitehall. Everything that you can imagine, really. He's written 2 books, and he came from a real life of difficult and humble beginnings, really, kind of manifested in trauma, really. So today, Gary's with us, and I'm really looking forward to speaking to him, getting his story, and obviously sharing that with you guys who are watching and listening. So thank you very much. So thanks for joining us today, Gary, and it's fantastic to have you here at the Podcast Studio. So I'm looking forward to getting to know about you and your story, where you've come from, a little bit about your childhood as well, because I always like to talk about childhood. So I suppose that's where we'll kind of start, really. So where, obviously our guests will be able to know that you've got an accent, so obviously you're from Scotland. So we'll talk a little bit about your kind of background, if that's okay.
Well, I didn't realise I had an accent. I've lived in England for longer than I've lived in Liverpool. So I moved to London in 1979 as a very young, very naive, fresh-faced, looked younger than I was, and ended up working in Whitehall and the House of Commons.
Wow.
And I worked in a non-political role, basically as a bag carrier for a government minister, first the Labour government, and then a few months later it changed to the Conservative government. And I first worked for a chap called Hugh Brown, who was a Scottish minister, and then to a chap called Malcolm Rifkind, and I basically made his coffee, his tea, I meeted, I greeted, and I would run between Dover House, the Scottish office in Whitehall, to the House of Commons and back.
Wow.
And it was fascinating. I did that for 3 years. And then my contract and my secondment ended, and I had to go back to Edinburgh. And although I love Edinburgh, I mean, I really, truly adore the place. It's beautiful. It's cold. Lots of windy alleys and things and valleys, the Athens of the North. Edinburgh's my hometown. And I was born there in 1959 and in a place called Leith. And so therefore, from 1959 to 1979, Scotland was my home. Then London. Then back for almost 2 years to Edinburgh. And thought, I enjoy ancient buildings, historic buildings, because I worked for the Historic Buildings Council when I went back to Edinburgh. And it kind of was interesting, but my heart wasn't in it. And I had met my soulmate, now my husband, back in 1979. Didn't like him. He is from Greenock, which is near Glasgow. His accent is different to mine, or it was. And we were talking about accents before. I moved to Liverpool because of him. He moved to Liverpool because of me. And that makes no sense. We met in London, and as I say, my secondment ended, had to go back to Edinburgh, and he was upset. So he tried to get a transfer from the Home Office, which is civil service in London, to either Edinburgh or Glasgow. but it's an English civil service department, not a Scottish one. So he couldn't move to Scotland. So he rings me one day and says, I've got closer. I'm coming to Liverpool. And I said, it's still a 5-hour train journey. Anyway, cut a long story short, after about a year and a half, I decided, with his help, that I would go to university. And I said, well, what am I going to study at university, Steve? And he said, technology, computing. It's the next big...
It's the future.
It's the future. And I said, really? Anyway, I came to Liverpool on the 12th of August, 1983, and I've never left. I love it. And I studied at the Polytechnic, and I studied a subject called computing and business, commerce. Loved it. And I became a coder. I became somebody who developed applications for computing, kind of in offices, at home, and whatever. And I created the world's first golf club. I don't know if you're into golf. Administration system.
Oh, okay.
And handicapping system. It would work out. You put your numbers in, and it would tell you what your handicap should be.
And was that because you had an interest in golf?
None at all.
None at all.
None at all.
Right.
Even today, I once tried to play golf at Gleneagles, very famous golf course in Scotland, and I battered the ball with the mightiest force ever, and it went about a foot ahead of me.
Just to give you an indication of my golfing skills.
Oh, yes.
If I go to the driving range,
Yes.
I hit the ball up onto the roof and it bounces up.
So
and
you're
down
as good as
onto-
me then.
Yeah, I'm terrible.
We're in the same
Terrible
kind
at
of
golf,
area.
terrible at basketball, but I'm pretty decent at other sports.
That's interesting.
But yeah, know your limitations. What we thanks for that wonderful introduction.
Thank
By the
you.
way, you're giving us a great glimpse of some of the roles that you've had.
Yeah.
A little bit of your background from 1959 to 1979. What I'm always interested in this podcast is because you've gone on to do some fantastic jobs and fantastic roles, and probably gone further than people ever expected that you would. Coming from really humble beginnings. Are you happy to talk about your kind of early childhood, what that was like? Kind of what, where you grew up, what type of house you lived in, who you grew up with, what your friends were like, what was school like, that type of thing. Because I always like to go back so that we can then go forward. So I don't know what you're happy to share and what.
I'm happy. I'm more than happy to share.
Perfect.
I've written about it. I've written 2 books.
Yeah.
One came out at the end of February, and the other is coming out, its sequel, in November. And I'm making a big announcement about it this coming weekend at a book fair where I'm going to be signing some of my books. And my books center on childhood trauma, on medical negligence, on domestic violence and abuse, about on a daily basis as a young boy from the age of about 2.5, I was probably beaten by both parents. Mm-hmm. My father liked to use his fists and his belt around the home, but my mother too. And it was a very difficult childhood, one that today I can reflect back on, and some of which, and I think a lot of children do this, is you invent, or at least I did, imaginary worlds to kind of get out of the one you're in.
Like a coping mechanism.
And it was a coping mechanism. And it all started in 1962. So, and I can't say whether I had a happy first 2.5, 3 years, but I think I did. I was the first child, so I'm the oldest, of 3. I was also the first grandson to all of my grandparents, one grandparent missing, and the first nephew to all my aunts and uncles. So I was kind of spoiled. And then slowly other children appeared and I was less spoiled. But I can't remember that. And then I wasn't at home any longer. Didn't know why. And
This was in 82.
62.
Sorry, 62.
62. And I wasn't sure where I was. I now know where I was because I got my social care records last year, the year before, so either 23, 24, I think it was 24, and it gave me the addresses of where I was. What I do remember is coming back from this strange place because parents weren't there. Nobody I knew was there. I hated it. It must have been 2.5. 3 years old-ish. Came back home and a major traumatic incident happened that actually I didn't kind of work out until a few years ago why I grew to hate my father. It was to start off not liking father.
Okay.
There was something he did, and if you want to know more, you can read my book. But he did something dreadful. And I kind of started a process until the age of 11 of being in and out of care, of being battered, hit, and so on. And I knew why, from the age of 5, why this was happening. But at the age of 2.5, when it started happening, I couldn't work it out. What had happened is that in the March of 62, my mother disappeared, my father disappeared, I was in care in somebody's home.
Was that with other children, or was that just
No,
just you?
with a family
Foster
in a
care.
place called Liberton. Well, I didn't know it was foster care. I just was in this stranger's house, like I'd been kidnapped. Nobody kind of explained it, or if they did, I was too young to understand it anyway.
Because it's quite early, isn't it, to have those core memories, 2.5, 3. I think to my own situation when I went into care, I can vaguely remember it, but I can't remember a lot of detail. There were certain kind of, snippets of it. But it's interesting that maybe your earliest memories are kind of rewinded a little bit because of the trauma that you experienced, because it's significant, isn't it? Significant on the brain. All the research that looks at trauma shows the difference in a trauma affected brain, so it will have an impact on you.
I think I've got the benefit of both. So I do have early memories, but not of trauma. I have early memories, and I'll tell you very quickly, my first memory is being bathed in a white ceramic tin bath. And I can still see today, and I remember this very clearly, I must have been between 2 and 2.5, being bathed in this tin bath on the stainless steel sink on top. The bath wasn't very big enough for a baby to be put into, or a young boy to be put into. And it had a bite out of it, a chip that was rusting, and it had a kind of cobalt blue trim, and I can still see that clearly today. That was my first memory. My second memory is waking up, or maybe being awake anyway, and screaming because I could hear a horror. It couldn't have been a very bad horror because it was 1962-ish, where I can hear the screaming and monsters on the TV, on the black and white TV in the room next door, in the room and kitchen. I was in the bedroom on a horsehair mattress with no sheet on it. I remember, with a scratchy blanket over me and a scratchy mattress under me and a broken spring poking me. I can remember all that, screaming because I can hear this rustling noise, thinking the monsters are coming to get me. And I don't know if you've seen the Peter Kay sketch. I think it's an advert where it says, don't worry about the noises or whatever. It's the monsters in the wardrobe. Well, my grandfather tells me it's the monsters under my bed. It was actually mice. It was rodents. But I was petrified, and I can remember that so clearly. But everything else I remember is nice. I can remember eating marzipan fruit shapes. I can remember eating maraschino cherries that my nana used to put into her Advocat and Baby Sham and lemonades. I can remember all of that, but not the beatings.
No.
Not most of the foster care, or was I in a foster home in terms of with other children. No, I wasn't. Was I with my brothers? Well, actually, I thought I wasn't, but now I know. And this is the memory bit. Some of my memories have come back because of my social care records.
Yeah.
Some have come back for another reason through my mother's health records. I was able to get my mother's health records from 62 to 65. My first book is about that, and my reflections about that.
So thinking about those records then, 'cause it's something that I've never done. But I've always thought, yes, I should,
Yeah.
but never actually got round to kind of doing it. It's, would you say that was significant for you then?
For me, it was. It was cathartic. It was a catalyst. It was a memory cleaner. It was vile, distressing. The way that psychiatrists and mental health institutions dealt with particularly women in the 60s, where a lot of the permission is given by the husband, by the man, and
often the abuser.
Although in my case, at my home, it was both sides. It wasn't just the father, it was also the mother. But my father was in charge. I discovered that it was my father each time put me and my brother Norman, my middle brother, into care every time because he couldn't cope with us. He couldn't cope because my mother wasn't there, and there was reason why my mother wasn't there. All of those came out through my mother's health records, a lot of them mental health based, but also physical health based. And some of the things that I kind of loosely remembered, they're set in stone now. I know exactly the facts, the figures from the evidence. I've researched it. I've almost kind of done a PhD in understanding childhood trauma and mental health support. In the 60s, Book 1, Silent Victims, Part 1, is about my mother's case notes, 150 pages. I didn't think I would get them. I was listening to a radio show and a podcast, and somebody said, "Oh, I got my mother's health records." And somebody said, "But how did you get them? Because they're private." "Oh, well, she died. And therefore, as the oldest son in the family, I was able to ask for them." I thought, well, I'm the oldest son. I wonder if it doesn't matter actually that you have to be the oldest or the youngest. So I wrote to the NHS in Scotland and said, could I have them? Because my mother is dead. She died in 2002. And about 6 months later, maybe a little bit less, they came back and said, the Director General has said you can have them.
Did you have to push for those?
No. I did what you might call a subject access or a freedom of information request, and I got them. But they warned me to make sure that I was sitting with somebody that is very close to me, or a mental health professional. They're that bad.
Wow.
And I got them. About 2 or 3 months later, a pack this big of scanned, some redacted. Most of it didn't have to be because it was actually personal to my mother, to me, this thick. And I thought, as I looked at it, well, they've told me not to read it unless I've got somebody professional or a loved one with me. And my husband, Steve, said to me, don't you read those without me being there with you. And then one day, and we've got an open plan kitchen and living room. It's not a roomy kitchen anymore, but an open plan room and kitchen, room and living room. And I sat there at the dining table, and I hear this voice, "You're not reading those, are you?" And I said, "I am." And I cried.
Yeah.
And he cried. And then I read them again, and I cried again. It was the best thing for me. It kind of solidified, corrected, helped, and actually helped me understand that what my father went through, what my mother went through, it wasn't their fault. Part of it was. Most of it wasn't. But I didn't know that until, because, you're talking about, you did say at the beginning, children, their brain formation through trauma is different. And that's your instinct. That's ingrained within you. And then you read something and you go, that explains it. That explains why my mother was the way she was, the way my father was. And I wrote the first book based on her case notes. So in one side in the book, one page is about her, is her case notes. And what I've done, and I'm a technologist by career, what I did is I actually used voice recognition technology. I used my Apple iPhone. Other phones do exist. And I basically read out every page into an email, corrected the accent where it's got it wrong slightly, the spelling mistakes. And then I used technology to zap it into a Word document. Every email became a page in a Word document. And then I read it again, each page. And it brought back memories. Some didn't need kind of exploration. They were really clear.
How? Sorry to interrupt you, Gary. How did that develop then, from reading your files? Was that part of the process for you? Did you did you want to? What was that kind of need to put that together in a book?
I'm old now, and I think before you die, I think it's worth. I'm very much into genealogy, ancestry. I've found 4,500 ancestors and relatives. I've found families that I didn't know we had. It's wonderful, and I kind of want. I have a tendency. A lot of children do this when they have gone through trauma. Overstate. I don't mean overstate unnecessarily, but kind of want to explore detail, want to understand their own significance. And a lot of that is actually about basically dotting the I's, crossing the T's. So in my mind, for me, it was about brain dumping. It was about getting it out there for not just for me, but for my family. And for some people to kind of look and say, well, I've gone through that. I now want to find out. I now want to write about it. I want to verbalize it. And there's nothing better. And a lot of psychologists will get you to talk about things. And actually talking about your background, your problems, your issues is really hugely important.
Of course.
And me verbalizing into Siri, into emails, into Word was actually a good way of me releasing that information. So actually, before I even brought the book out, I released it. But when I brought the book out, am I oversharing? And then the feedback I've got is, no, we want to know more, which is why the bigger book about all 5 of us in the family, my mother, my father, my middle brother Norman, and my youngest brother Leslie, that's book 2.
Your brother's still.
Well, the whole point of mother's records, memory exploration, or writing it down, was started by the death of my youngest brother.
Wow.
And our trauma started with the birth of my youngest brother.
Okay.
And my youngest brother was born March 62, severely disabled. My mother was blamed for it by my father and her father and the medical profession.
Wow. And
she spent a long time feeling the blame, the guilt, because they blamed her. Everybody blamed her. Wow. She went into hospital. Well, what did you do? Were you drinking alcohol? Were you smoking cigarettes? What were you doing to abuse your body to produce a disabled boy?
And when you touched on it before about the treatment of your mum, that was kind of that then? Was that how she was treated because of that?
Wouldn't be today.
No.
There'd be much more caring, much more understanding. In those days, less so. I mean, book 1 is really exploring the social history of psychiatric and mental health care, and sometimes a lack of it. And when I brought my book out, before I brought it out, one issue I had in my head was, I don't want to explain the reason why she's like this until book 2. Because if I'd written my book in 1965, her records, all of my mother's records, only 3 years. But she suffered till she died. But only 3, that's all they've got. 62 to 65. In 65, if I'd written that book, you wouldn't have known the reason why she was the way she was. You do now, because in 1970, they actually found out it was because she'd been given the thalidomide drug, like thousands of other women, for morning sickness and other issues. She suffered from dreadful morning sickness, so they gave her once thalidomide.
Wow.
She took it once. And when she took it, the process of the development of the baby in the womb stops whatever is happening at that point from growing. It may be limbs, could be legs, arms. In my brother's case, it was ears, the internal organs to hear, his eyes, his mouth, his face. He had a paralyzed face, couldn't actually move it. He could actually later on, with a lot of practice, slight glimmers of smiles, etc., a cheeky grin, couldn't close his eyes, couldn't close his mouth, had no ears, could not speak, could not hear, because that's what was developing in the womb at that time. She didn't know that until 1970. In that period, however, 62 to 70 for 8 years, doctors, family, father, my father, her husband, her own father, vile. It was her fault. And she died still believing,
yeah, that was
it was her fault.
And
she died in 2002.
Yeah.
And what the medical profession did and what psychiatrists did is she couldn't understand it. So she constantly had major issues. She tried to commit suicide 7, 8 times.
Wow.
She overdosed constantly by mistake. That wasn't deliberately to die, but she constantly overdosed. So what did they do? Thalidomide is a sedative, and it helps with chemical imbalances in the brain because of morning sickness and other issues. So that's the start of it. Never tested on pregnant women. Adverts at the time said entirely safe for expectant mothers and babies. No, it wasn't. It was developed in concentration camps by the Nazis. That's where it started, and brought out by a German drug company, never tested on pregnant women, and pregnant women developed babies who were disabled.
Was that a process in writing the book, was researching the background to it?
Completely.
Was it something that you didn't know anything about?
I knew bits of it. I didn't know all the details.
Yeah.
And I still don't know all the details.
It's something I'm aware of. My degree's in disability and special needs, so I know quite a bit about the history of, so I am aware of it, about the history of disability. But I don't think it was as, not as many people knew about it from my generation, if that makes sense. But I'm sure in your generation there was a big hoo-ha about it in the media, or did they keep it quiet once all this came?
They kept it quiet in a big way.
Right.
Many children, I don't know if you've seen the episode on Call the Midwife, but many children were basically stillborn, and got rid of. And actually, because they didn't do any tests, you don't know it was thalidomide. So Martin Johnson and Harold Evans from the Times, I think it's the Times. See, this is where sometimes you forget, because there's so much detail.
Yeah.
And I am informed, and it's in the books, but they are convinced that 80,000 children died.
Wow. 10,000
were born thalidomide. In the United Kingdom, 520 survived. Many others died. Many others died. So 520. There's about 420 left today. And they are dying. And my brother died when he was 59. And he died from complications of COVID and from issues relating to his symptoms that came later as a thalidomide survivor. Deterioration of the spine, muscular, skeletal problems, deterioration. His became quite serious. So he got COVID, got over it, but got an infection from it. And gathering of mucus, which actually choked him to death, basically, on January the 27th of 2022. And I wasn't with him, sadly. I knew he was about to die. I was told it would be the weekend, and I rushed up, and he'd gone already. So it was very, very sad in terms of his death. So he choked to death. But actually the reason why he choked to death is one of his later symptoms that a lot of the thalidomide survivors are suffering from today is deterioration of the muscles and the bones in the spinal area, particularly in the neck and shoulder area. And it actually stops
pressure.
It stops you being able to swallow, to be able to drink and whatever in his case. And he was being peg fed as well. He couldn't swallow anything. He was desperate for a pint of lager or a vodka or a packet of crisps or a smoke of a cigarette. He couldn't do any of that in his final 6 months of his life, down to thalidomide. Still 59 years later.
Yeah.
So, but in those days, it was a sedative. It was taken to help with morning sickness. And my mother, of course, didn't know that this is what was causing the problem until 1970. But for the rest of her life, she was on constant hypnotics and sedatives to stop acute depression, because she was suffering from the worst depression ever. In fact, I've said in book 1, the longest postnatal depression anyone has seen. But actually, it isn't. The majority of the mothers of thalidomide survivors suffered from mental health issues that they didn't understand at first, caused by the thalidomide drug.
So as part of this process, have you spoken to mothers, similar mothers in that situation?
I have. I've spoken to, well, not mothers, because most of them are dead now.
Right. Okay.
But I've spoken to siblings
Yeah.
and to survivors. And I made a big point in my second book, Part 2, Silent Victims Part 2, to include a whole chapter on stories from survivors and siblings, because I wanted to understand, was it just us? Was it just me? No, it was common. Some did have great families that actually were supported, let's say, properly by both family and by the medical profession, but many divorces came, many early deaths, suicides came, particularly with mothers. Many got divorced. The father couldn't cope. The mother couldn't cope, obviously, but the father couldn't cope. And many of the children were abused, domestically battered, hit, whatever. Many turned to alcohol dependency and drug dependency.
I think, obviously in the 50s and 60s, 70s even, right up to the 80s, disability was looked at in a very different way, wasn't it? There were people with disabilities were taken out of society quite often.
They were.
Alongside, teenage, pregnant,
Yes,
young,
very
young,
much so.
young
But can I just say, though,
Yeah.
it's really interesting on that is as we move into 2025, 2026 and so on, it's great to see that there's more inclusion in schools where people who are visually impaired, hearing impaired, enhanced learning needs are actually in mainstream. Because in those days, they were kind of hidden in a corner. They were in a ward, almost like a mental health institution, a care facility. I mean, my brother was hidden away.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of it I didn't remember.
They were medicated. They were taken out of your mainstream society, if you like. Not just a mainstream school, but they were taken away from the parents.
Could you imagine this? He couldn't speak and couldn't hear, couldn't move his mouth, couldn't move it. Forced to do not sign language. Sign language in all schools in the UK wasn't taught in the 60s. What they used was a subject called oralism, which was vibration and mainly lip reading. He couldn't use his lips, but he was forced to have a one-way conversation where he'd lip read what they were saying, but he couldn't communicate. When he left school, he was, from a mental health practitioner, diagnosed officially as having, well, there was language used which is not appropriate, but he had a mental capacity of a 9, or cognitive capacity of a 9-year-old. The reason being is he couldn't do English, geography, history, languages, because he couldn't basically communicate. And he didn't actually get the right, the legal right to communicate as an adult until he was about 42 years old. Because nobody actually knew properly that he could do sign language eventually, which he learnt after he left school. So as I grew older, when he was dying in hospital, I felt so dreadful that I couldn't do proper sign language, because by the time he could do sign language, I was in London, I was in Liverpool, I was at university, I was working, I'd gone on to become, fairly successful. And I look back and think, you didn't get the same opportunities as I did because you couldn't communicate, because at school they taught him oralism, not sign language. And I think every school should be teaching sign language. Every school should be inclusive. Every child should learn about children that are just like them, but might have different abilities. And in the 60s and 70s, that wasn't the case.
I think what's interesting, where obviously I work in a trust of schools. I see, I was speaking with a parent this morning actually, who was looking for a diagnosis for the child before I came here, talking about inclusion and talking about hubs, and we have a lot of hubs within our schools, and it is more inclusive and really inclusive. But I think there's still a way to go. I think parents have got to fight for funding for things. They've got to fight for EHCP plans and diagnosis and things.
Don't get me started on EHC plans.
Yeah.
I've been governor of 2 major schools, and in the end, I was only helping in exclusion appeals, and I would sit in those appeals, and the senior leadership team were making the right decisions in all cases about exclusion because it had gone too far. But if things like the health, what's the word I'm looking for?
Education, healthcare.
Education, healthcare plan had been done in a better time basis of, when you notice that there's something about your child, where it may be ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, Tourette's, and different abilities, and you go to a medical professional.
Funnily enough, sorry, I've just had this conversation this morning, because my background is in disability before safeguarding, so I, that's my qualification, that's what I did my degree in, but then I fell into the world of safeguarding, and it's all on my podcast if you get a chance to watch my kind of 2-part podcast about my life and my background. So I've got a really good understanding, a good interest in disability. But I said to a parent this morning, one of the first questions I asked her was, "Are you okay?" Because quite often they're not asked that. The second question, the second statement I made was, "You are the expert in your child. You know your child the best." And it's funny that you should mention that about parents not being perhaps listened to and having to fight, and having to speak to professionals and fight for appointments and fight for, and the SEN kind of registers in all schools nationally are going through the roof. 30, 35, 40, 50%. I asked the school I was in this morning, which is King's Wavertree, which is one of our brand new schools. What are your SEN numbers now at the minute? And I think they've got 187 students, brand new startup school, just year 7, and they've got 50 in 1 year group. So that just gives you an indication of the rise of...
What can I say on that? So we cannot criticise CAMS, NHS, or the local authorities for the delays in the assessments, because it's resources, it's funding and stuff.
Definitely resources,
But actually, if you were to predict where some of those children and young people eventually get to, the cost is higher. And actually, the fact that you've got to wait, in some cases, not always, 4 years for some children to be assessed. Could you just imagine if it's as simple as dyslexia and it's not been assessed, then unless the school itself kind of recognizes it, and they do, and teachers are wonderful, and the SEN, Senkos and whatever are absolutely amazing in schools. But if a simple difference is made just in the colour of paper, that child will blossom earlier.
Yeah.
So why is it that when you sometimes have a secondary school, that the year 7s come in with a reading age of a 7-year-old, they're 11 or 12, and they've got a reading age of a 7-year-old, because sometimes they've not been assessed in time to give them the right paper, the right imagery. And I think there's simple little things about some children start to play up when they're bored, when they can't read, when they feel as though somebody's calling them stupid and being bullied because they've got dyslexia.
So they become dysregulated. They start to self-stimulate.
Do.
Quite often children in classrooms have not, and this is not in any way pointing the blame at anybody, because we're not here to do that.
No, of course not.
They haven't even received a sensory assessment.
Yeah.
So a child with ASD, for instance, sensory issues are massive. Quite often it's not even considered. When I was working in that area, I was constantly saying, have they had a sensory assessment? Have they had a sensory assessment? And quite often the answer was no. But we digress.
You're going to make a difference. But we're not digressing, because when I was at primary school, so I was in and out of care till the age of 11, and I was told at my last primary school, I will amount to nothing. I was told, my brother, when he was diagnosed as having a cognitive capacity, a mental capacity of a 9-year-old, he was called retarded. And when I was 11, I was called retarded. I would never do well anywhere.
Did you struggle with like reading and writing when you were younger, or kind of cognition? Or?
I was always 1 year ahead or 1 year behind. I went to 8 different primary schools, and therefore I was always the new boy. I was always out of kilter.
Yeah.
So therefore, whatever plans and kind of progress they had in place, I was always out, always.
Restarting.
I was starting over again. So things like grammar and spelling and maths and arithmetic was never my forte. So I went to secondary school. And at the time I went to secondary school, and it was like everything coming together at once. My brother was eventually diagnosed as being a thalidomide survivor. So therefore, my parents were given compensation by the government, by the Thalidomide Trust, by the drug supplier, who then felt guilty, a grand sum of £5,000. It was actually a little bit less. And they bought their first non-corporation or non-council house.
Wow.
And it was in Gorgie, in Edinburgh, near Tynecastle and Murrayfield, near where Hearts of Midlothian play football and where the rugby takes place at Murrayfield.
A nicer area?
Nicer from where we'd been.
Yeah.
Not the best, but great people. And we moved into 119 Gorgie Road, and Mum and Dad were so excited by it. This is a new life, this is a new beginning. And we were there one night, and there was a laundrette next door. We were on the ground floor level, laundrette next door. I went to get a glass of water in our kitchen. Mum heard me, got up at the same time, and then both of us walked into the living room, and all we heard was, we heard and felt crunch, 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 crunch noises. We could feel it on our feet, turned the light on, thousands of cockroaches all over the floor from the laundry next door had come in. Mum had a big breakdown. She was in hospital again.
Wow.
That was our new beginning. First night, completely destroyed her. For me, however, new beginning, new area. I thought, I don't want to be the bullied boy. I don't want to be going through trauma at school and so on as well. So I went out the next day, and I'm in a supermarket. Grocers, a big enhanced grocers, Benson's. It was wonderful. And I walked in and said, do you have any jobs, Saturday jobs? And he said, yeah. Do you want to start Saturday? So I did. And I went into a newsagent's and I got a job as a newspaper delivery boy. And if you know Scotland's homes, tenements, 6 to 8 stories tall, no lifts, that was me for 4 years, running up and down. I was so fit.
So what age were you then?
I was 11, 12.
Yeah, that's interesting, that, because that's what I did. I came from quite a poor background. There wasn't a lot of money, and I knew one of the only ways out of that was to work, and I knew that from quite an early age. I had paper rounds, milk rounds,
Same here.
night and after school, weekends, and I was, I had quite a bit of money, but I knew I couldn't get that from home, so it was like that was my way of, and I think that stayed with me, that work ethic.
Well, it's interesting. You and I are both wearing a nice tie. I'm wearing a waistcoat, or in America, a vest.
I mean, I'm overdressed for this podcast.
Well, you're not. No, you're not.
But I'm so glad when I arrived, you were in a suit as well.
So when I was when I went to secondary school, I was called Dapper Gary because I was always smart.
Yeah.
Because up to 11, I was in hand-me-downs,
Yeah.
fraying, holy elbows,
Yeah.
dirty. I probably smelled. I was bullied because of it,
Yeah.
mainly by girls.
Yeah.
That was my primary years. I was called a retard. I was called a dunce. I was called stupid. I'll never amount to anything. Year 1, 2 jobs, helping me buy my own clothes. I think my formative years were then, not the earlier ones, not the 0 to 7.
Yeah.
I think I kind of became obsessed with looking smart, obsessed with first impressions, not wanting to be bullied.
Do you think you were starting at that age, and obviously with your new job and your independence, and obviously you're meeting new people, you're communicating with people in a job, you're really starting to understand who you are, you've got puberty and all that kind of stuff. But do you feel that was when you first started to perhaps flourish a little bit, or move from languishing?
Well, so end of year 1 at secondary school, I was given, I didn't know this until I was in the room, in the assembly, the English prize for the year. They gave me a book, history, German, arithmetic, and art. I was like top boy.
Just flying. Yeah.
And everybody said, you?
Yeah.
Like questioning it.
What would you put that down to? Why that?
I was in a new
What
school.
Was it environment?
With other people, boys and girls who were in a new school all together.
Yeah.
So it was a new experience for all of us. The style of teaching was better for me. Home life, I don't know, it's because of puberty and because of maturity and being able to kind of understand better and question things better. Kind of maturity hit me, perhaps not in all areas, but I kind of felt more comfortable because I was smarter and I took control of my own life. I ended up in that first year, 12, with my money that I was earning in the supermarket and the newspaper deliveries, actually buying food for the family because mum wasn't there at that time. She was in hospital again.
Do you think were you treated differently by your parents because you were starting to become more independent? You were doing well at school?
No, still getting battered, still being ignored. It still wasn't. Home life wasn't brilliant. But that the imaginary world. Well, I now had my real imaginary world where I would actually, rather than sit at home, I'd be I'd be stamping prices with a gun onto tins of beans and spaghetti hoops and peas and whatever in the supermarket.
Was that your kind of safe space?
It was my safe place, and then doing the deliveries and getting fitter as well. Yeah. That was my safe place. That mental kind of physical health bit was so important to me. And then doing well at school and getting affirmative kind of reactions to who I was wonderful at that age. It was life-changing for me.
So you were having more positive interactions with people, weren't you, outside of the family home? Were there any moments where, I think when you live in an environment like that, this is my finding. When I started to get a little bit older, I think I left the house when I was like 16, left school with no qualifications.
Right.
Started off in school in all the top sets like you, but then because of what was happening at home, I didn't get, I didn't achieve anything in school.
No.
Always very capable. And you can see that later on when I went to university. I left with a first class degree, and I've always had a really good work ethic. But then wasn't the right time for me. Seems like you were flourishing a little bit earlier than that because of your environment, the external stuff that was happening. You were, I think, sounds like you were starting to build confidence, and
I certainly did. The one thing I would say though is I flourished, and I did flourish right until I left, but I didn't flourish to where I should have been.
Yeah.
In that, at the age of 15, I discovered girls, I discovered discos, clubs, and pubs. And my dad had an alcohol problem, a serious alcohol problem, became manager of a bar. And me and my mates could go into his bar and get a drink. And you shouldn't be, but we were.
Oh, yeah.
And Dad drank all the profits, and he never had that job 2 years later. However, I kind of was making money, was comfortable with myself, enjoying life with friends. I had great friends, still got great friends today, but I wanted to do architecture. I wanted to go to university. I got accepted to do to do architecture at 2 universities. I just needed to get 3 B's and a C, and I got 2 B's and a C. So I didn't do architecture. So I had 2 choices: become full-time manager of the supermarket that I started at 12 and loved it, or civil service. Did the civil service. Was working in the Ancient Monuments Division doing VAT reconciliation for about 6 months. They headhunted me and said, did I want to go to London, to Whitehall, to work for a government minister? So
what age were you then? Sorry, Gary.
So I would be 19, 20.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's big, isn't it?
And my mum said, don't go to London. There's bad people in London. And Dad said, let's go. Well, okay. And I explore that in part 2, my book, about the leaving of Edinburgh, the best thing I could ever have done. And I talk about a thing called sliding doors. Sometimes you plan things, but sometimes the magic happens when you least expect it. And going to London, if I hadn't gone, I wouldn't have met Steve. If I hadn't met Steve, I wouldn't be in Liverpool. And if I hadn't been in Liverpool, I wouldn't have gone to university to study technology and actually have a very successful technology business and other businesses. And if it hadn't been for going to London, meeting Steve, coming to Liverpool, going to the Poly, getting into business, I wouldn't have discovered some of my other skills, which are marketing and sales and writing software, and emotional intelligence and kind of public speaking. And I would never have become Lord Mayor of Liverpool. And I would never have become Deputy Mayor of Liverpool. Now I'm out of that now. I've retired from that. But I still today deliver pro bono, that's free of charge, business clinics where we sit, we listen, we help, we're critical friends, we're shoulders to cry on of thousands upon thousands of businesses. And I've got 62 volunteers who all use the same phrase I use on a daily basis. I don't want thanks. I don't want applause. It's called pay it forward.
Yeah.
Rather than thanking me, you go and do something nice for somebody, whatever that might be, but ask 2 or 3 others to do the same.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan.
I've got the book.
Of Pay It Forward.
Yep.
That is my life now. And that is a life. It's trauma informed. It's what the lessons I've learned, the entrepreneurial spirit I got when I got my first jobs, where I started to wear a shirt and a tie to look smart, to create a good impression, because I know that it makes a big difference in whatever environment you are. You don't always wear shirts and ties. I often wear shorts and jeans and baseball caps as well. But my go-to is this. It's Dapper Man, Dapper Gary. And if I can make a difference in anyone's life, I'm doing it for no financial gain, no personal gain, apart from that satisfaction that you've done something significant for others. So I'm happy to do the pro bono stuff. I'm happy to help our universities do what they do. I'm happy to help our businesses do what they do. I'm chair and president of an Asian trade organization, working with our universities and our hospitals to collaborate more overseas and bring more students into Liverpool. I'm also honorary president of the Commonwealth Association, which is working with our Commonwealth communities here in Liverpool and the city region. I'm kind of the internationals lead in many ways for what we do ambassadorial in welcoming and delegations. So when that teacher said to me back when I was 11 going on 12 that you'll never amount to anything, sliding doors, a smile and pay it forward kind of works for me, and it should work for others. But I work really hard. I do too much.
Well, it's that work ethic, isn't it, that you developed when you were younger. I'm quite similar. You know, I'm always doing something on the go. I wake up early. I go to bed late. I don't have it's not an imbalance where I don't sleep properly. I can shut off, I can close off, I can compartmentalise things. It sounds like you're quite similar, you know, in a sense that you've got that work ethic. You just keep going, and to me, it's like, well, it will open up other avenues. You'll get to meet, like this podcast, for instance. I get to meet fabulous people like you.
Thank you.
That have got wonderful stories and inspirational stories, you know. And I think, well, this is, you know, just an idea really, and thankfully I've got people in the trust that support me. But this is just one example. But it sounds like you've got so many things that do you find it difficult to say no sometimes, or do you really think about
I'm getting
the project?
better at it.
Yeah.
But of course I'm getting better at it, and you think, well, actually, you should have been doing that. No.
Yeah.
But you don't want to let people down. You know, when I was Lord Mayor of Liverpool, it was the most amazing experience ever. I mean, truly. And if I can become a Lord Mayor, any child in difficulty today, any family, boy, girl, man, woman, whoever can amount to something, can make a change. When I was Lord Mayor, somebody said to me, "You're doing too much. You need to say no more." I actually attended 93% of the events I was invited to in that year. I did 1,534 events in that year. That is between 5 and 12 a day, and I couldn't say no. Do you know why? Because they were like me. They've gone to effort. They've organised something. They've done something. They've gone through trauma. They've gone through fighting in a war, in conflict. They're at a school that's doing amazing or not doing amazing, but they've really applied themselves.
Well,
we need to respect that, and that's why I did it. That's why I don't say no. I respect other people for what they do,
and that's because of your humble beginnings, isn't it?
It is.
That's because
completely.
That's a leader. That's somebody at the front and somebody that people rely on, that really understands people, because you've experienced. It's not the same as them, but it's similar things. You've had hardship. You've had, you know, what a fantastic story. You know, I think we've been here for an hour or so now. You know, I need another hour at least with you. So I hope hopefully you'll come back. Hopefully you'll come back on the podcast.
I'd love to come back.
We've kind of gone here, there, and everywhere on this podcast, but it's been so interesting. I'm sure our viewers as well.
I want to learn more about you too, and thank you for what you're doing with the Great Schools Trust. But also what you're doing outside of that. So I like the fact that you've your degrees in disability and understanding of that area, but also moving into, you know, special educational needs, enhanced learning needs. We need more of an understanding.
Now Safeguard, I'm the head of Safeguarding the Trust,
right.
Which is a fantastic job as well. But you know, I want to do more of this. I want to talk to people like you that have experienced the fact that you've kind of written 2 books. Maybe even more, I don't know.
Oh, I will write more.
Yeah, you know, it's something that I'd like to
do. There'll be more upbeat, though.
Yes.
So
you've done the heart, you've done the trauma bit. And
let's close on this one.
Yeah.
I won't give you too much away, but I'm doing my family tree. And I stopped at one point because Stephen, my husband, said, concentrate on finding your mother's mother who disappeared when my mother was 2.5. I found her. I found her mother. She was dead, sadly. I've got a whole new family. However, in doing that process, I got distracted. When you do your family tree, you go down a rabbit hole and you look and you find stuff that you digress.
Yeah.
And I digressed into the Queen of the Nile, Cleopatra.
Wow.
I am related through, not bloodline, but through marriage to Mark Antony and Cleopatra.
Maybe that's where you
I want to find out what happened there.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to be writing about next. Fantastic. It's those stories.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. What a lovely way to end. And I mean, it beats Danny Dyer's kind of, links, doesn't it, to, I think, it was King James.
It was, wasn't it? I think it was, yeah.
But yeah, I'd love to get you back on the show. I'd love to, I know we've gone here, there and everywhere today, but I feel like the viewers will have had a real insight to you as a person, what you've experienced, in childhood, what you've gone on to do, which is just unreal, isn't it? And as you said, and it's my mantra as well, if I can do stuff like this from where I started off from, and you're, probably, even more than me, but with a different story, is anybody can do it. And I'm sure people will be inspired by this. And
it's been an absolute pleasure being here
Thank
today.
you very much. And they'll be interested as well to know more about what you've been writing about, with your brother and your mum, and, all those things we've talked about.
Sure.
And I'd love to get you back on. So,
well, let's do that.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for tuning in, and like I said, I really hope you enjoyed today's session. I certainly did, and what a fantastic guest Gary's been. So thanks very much. Please, if you do watch this video, please like, subscribe and share, and we will see you next time. Thanks very much. Bye bye.